Today at 6, the NHS under growing pressure with staff absences rising sharply during Christmas week. The number of NHS staff off work in England because of COVID went up by more than 40%. The latest official survey also suggests that more than 2 million people tested positive for COVID in the run-up to Christmas, adding to the NHS problems.
The staff that are at work will be caring for more patients, trying to do more to cover for their missing colleagues, working extra hours, starting early, finishing late. The pressure will be immense.
Also today in South Africa, final respects are paid to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whose state funeral takes place tomorrow. And the new year has already arrived on the other side of the globe, with some countries carrying on with their parties despite concerns about the pandemic. Good evening. The pressure on the NHS has been brought into sharp focus by the latest official figures on staff absences related to COVID. Those absences in acute NHS trusts in England increased by more than 40% during Christmas week. An average of more than 25,000 health workers were off sick or isolating every day. And the rapid spread of the Omicron variant is underlined by the latest estimates from the Office for National Statistics, which suggests that 1 in 30 people in the UK tested positive for COVID in the period before Christmas. Our health correspondent, Catherine Da Costa, has the latest details.
Most NHS staff will be glad to see the back of 2021. Nearly 2 years into this pandemic, many are exhausted. A spike in COVID cases is driving a rise in staff sickness. In England, London's worst affected, with about 4% of staff in acute trusts absent for COVID-related reasons in the week before Christmas, up nearly 60% on the week before. Many feel it's impacting on patient care.
The staff that are at work will be caring for more patients, trying to do more to cover for their missing colleagues, working extra hours, starting early, finishing late. The pressure will be immense.
In the latest infection survey from the ONS, infections increased across the UK to their highest level on record in the week to Christmas Eve. In England, 1 in 25 had the virus. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, it was 1 in 40. Infections doubled in a week in London. 1 in 15 would test positive. But there were big rises too in the Northwest, Yorkshire and the Humber and the West Midlands. And other regions weren't far behind.
And it is now the dominant variant.
Statisticians say infections are twice the level they were this time last winter in England because they're being fuelled by the more infectious Omicron variant.
So across all age groups, we are seeing increases, but particularly driven by those young age groups. We've seen increases among school-age children fairly recently, particularly those sort of from nursery through to primary. But we are now seeing infections among older age groups as well. So they're sort of young adults from mid-20s to mid-30s, but spreading right the way up to some increases now in the over 70s, although they do remain the lowest group to be infected.
There's some more encouraging news on boosters. New UK data suggests a booster shot is 88% effective at preventing people ending up in hospital due to Omicron. And after a huge push, all UK nations say they've hit the target of offering all adults a third dose by the end of the year.
I would just say to people again, there's a 1.5 million slots out there over the next few days. There's plenty of opportunity. There's mobile vaccination units. There's GPs vaccinating. There's all sorts of ways to get vaccinated. And just please do come forward and as I say, help yourself, but also help reduce that burden on the NHS.
And now this, a second antiviral pill's been approved by the UK regulator. In trials, Pfizer's Paxlovid drug offered nearly 90% protection from severe illness and death among vulnerable adults. There's a glimmer of hope for the new year. Vaccines and new treatments should help protect the most at risk from serious illness. But there are huge uncertainties. If there's a sharp rise in hospital admissions, health leaders say ministers will have to act fast. Catherine Da Costa, BBC News.
Let's take a look then at the latest government data now. And there were a record 189,846 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. The average over the past week is now more than 150,000 new cases every day. Nearly 12,000 patients were in hospital with coronavirus on the 29th of December. 203 deaths were recorded of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, and 110 COVID-related deaths were recorded on average every day in the past week. On vaccinations, 233,464 people a day had boosters on average in the past 7 days, bringing the total to almost 34 million. Well, no new restrictions have been introduced in England for New Year's Eve, but in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, there are stricter rules now in place for hospitality venues and for indoor gatherings. And there are reports of people in Scotland and Wales getting ready to travel to England to celebrate the new year, while Boris Johnson has been urging anyone attending parties to take a COVID test beforehand. Our correspondent Olivia Richwald reports now from Carlisle in Cumbria, just 8 miles from the border with Scotland.
Everyone getting ready for a good night out. Carlisle is known as the border city, and these Scots were happy to be here, free of restrictions.
There's nothing to do in the south of Scotland. So, I mean, this is the nearest place with stuff to do.
Does it bother you that the Scottish Government has said don't come?
Yeah, it does bother me, yeah.
Bye-bye.
I don't think you've got the right to say that. I'm going to have a brilliant time, because that's what New Year's all about. Hug me now.
Absolutely.
This is that.
Are you here for the whole night, or are you just here for a quick drink?
Just here at a party.
The Scottish Government had urged people not to travel to England for New Year, but Carlisle is just 20 minutes from the border. At the Holston hotel manager, Jan said many of his rooms had been rented to Scots.
Tonight it'll be probably half of the central belt coming down. I think it's going to be busy. I think Carlisle will complain a little bit, but secretly will be quite happy. It's money in the till.
It's a similar story near the border with Wales. In Bristol, pubs were expecting plenty of Welsh guests.
Bristol's another one of those cities as well, because we are so close to the border. You can't even tell whether they're coming over to visit or whether they're actually living here, because a lot of Welsh people do live in Bristol.
But despite the party atmosphere, many people around the country, including in Salford, have scaled back their plans.
It's just COVID. COVID's the one that's stopping us.
We have been invited to a house party, so we're just trying to decide whether to go or not. So it's just with a few neighbours.
So we are just planning to stay in, stay at home, stay safe. Everyone we seem to know seems to have COVID at the moment, so we're trying to avoid getting it ourselves.
Here in Carlisle, there are lots of people from England and Scotland who've not let COVID ruin their celebrations. And in a couple of hours, this road will be closed to traffic, and then the party can really begin.
People are depressed and sad. A lot of people are just sad. And they just need that cheer to make them happy.
What's your message for New Year?
Love. One word, one life, live, love.
For those working in hospitality, tonight's takings could be vital. No one knows what restrictions might be introduced in England in 2022. Olivia Richwald, BBC News, Carlisle.
So, in the final countdown to those New Year's Eve celebrations, let's take a look then at how the varying restrictions are having an impact in all 4 of the home nations. In a moment, we'll have the picture in Cardiff and in Belfast and in London, but we start with James Shaw in Edinburgh.
In a normal year, this location where I am, just below Edinburgh Castle, would be the centre of a huge fireworks display at midnight, visible across the city and far beyond it as well. And in the streets below, there would be perhaps 80,000 people celebrating Hogmanay. None of that is going to happen this year, and a lot of other big events will be cancelled. In hospitality, pubs and restaurants, groups of 3 households at a maximum can meet, and they must keep distance from other groups. Nightclubs will be closed. There will be no dancing, at least until the 17th, not the Hogmanay that many people in Scotland would have wanted.
New restrictions have been enforced here in Wales since Boxing Day, to the frustration of many in the hospitality sector who depend on this festive week to help them through the new year. So nightclubs here too are closed. Dance floors tonight should be deserted. People going to pubs, bars and restaurants will have to stay at the tables to be served and abide by the rule of 6, so stick to small groups. Now, house parties are allowed, but with a maximum of up to 30 people indoors. And the advice is to keep that to about 3 households. Same caution being urged on anyone who does go over the border into England to celebrate. It's not banned, it's not against the rules, but the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, wants people to consider the consequences. The consequences of all that for businesses here in Wales? Well, probably a rather quiet end to the year. Well, this New Year's Eve in Northern Ireland certainly isn't normal, but we are a long way from the lockdown of last year. If you're having friends round to your home or if you're going to someone else's, well, the guidance is that no more than 3 households should socialise together indoors. Out and about, it's table service only in pubs and restaurants, and there's a limit of 6 people at each table. Now, even if there is music, well, there'll still be no dancing. That's been banned altogether in all hospitality venues. Today, Northern Ireland has recorded its highest ever daily figure for positive coronavirus cases, and also the number of COVID patients in hospital is rising, though relatively slowly. So there's caution and concern, but also many would say a greater sense of hope than 12 months ago.
For the second year in a row, London's major public fireworks display along the River Thames has been cancelled. The plan instead was to have a more intimate celebration here in Trafalgar Square, a concert for key workers and members of the public. But ultimately, as those cases of Omicron started to tick up, the Mayor Sadiq Khan here in London decided that even that was too risky tonight. And so you can see what they've done now is close off the whole of Trafalgar Square to stop people from even being able to congregate here. But that doesn't stop people in London and across the rest of England from heading to bars and clubs tonight to celebrate, because there are no restrictions here on socialising. And actually, to the other side of the square and to the other side of me, there are lots of people out already enjoying themselves, having a good time. But the government's advice this evening to anyone who's thinking about heading out is to take a lateral flow test first. Though with some of the shortages we've seen over the past week, of course, that might not be possible for everybody.
Jean, many thanks there in Trafalgar Square in central London, and our thanks to my other colleagues Chris and Howell and James in the 4 home nations of the UK. Let's have a look at some of the day's other news. A 15-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a teenager in Croydon in South London last Thursday. There was another fatal stabbing that evening when a 16-year-old boy was killed in Hillingdon in West London. It brings to 30 the number of teenage homicides in London this year, surpassing the peak of 29 in 2008. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports from Hillingdon.
In 2021's final days, paramedics tried to save 2 young lives. A 15-year-old stabbed in a park in Croydon, South London. And in Hillingdon, West London, a 16-year-old with a single stab wound in this green space. 2 new murder investigations and a record high for the number of teenage murders in 1 year.
Children are carrying knives because they feel like they need to protect themselves. And I'm putting a message out there to every child, please, you need to understand the pain of parents and siblings that have lost somebody to murder.
Violent crime is falling, but not when it comes to young people murdered in London. More teenage victims than the previous high in 2008 can't be ignored. For some time, and today, police have blamed
the glorification of knives on social media and credibility and people cussing each other on social media. We're seeing it again and again and again. At the same time, we've got changing drug markets and the emergence of county lines in the last few years that we're really focusing on.
That's a type of drug dealing which drags vulnerable children into being involved. In Hillingdon, people were worried about dealers using the parkland where the murder happened. This man didn't want to be identified.
They're obviously, trying to protect their grounds and their little drug lines that you've got going on and all that sort of thing, yeah.
It's a big worry.
It is when I've got children,
In Croydon, a 16-year-old's been arrested, and here the investigation continues. These murders will put the Metropolitan Police under pressure. But youth workers say we need to concentrate instead on the chaotic lives of some young people and the social reasons why their lives might be threatened. Tom Simons, BBC News, West London.
In South Africa, thousands of people have been waiting in line to pay their final respects to the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whose body is lying in state for a second day ahead of the state funeral tomorrow. The Archbishop, who played a leading role in the battle against racial segregation and the apartheid regime, died on Sunday at the age of 90. Our South Africa correspondent, Nomsa Miseko, reports now from Cape Town.
The clergy, Anglican church wardens and a marching band lining the streets as a guard of honor for Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The outspoken priest who became one of the world's great moral voices lying in state for a second day in a plain pine wood coffin in accordance with his wishes. Thousands of people have been flocking to St. George's Cathedral to pay their last respects. One man hitchhiked for more than 1,000 kilometers just for this moment.
It's a memory that I would live for the rest of my life. And I just hope, as he said in his word, he said, South Africa, you must be careful. If you don't live according to that values, you might bite the dust.
Archbishop Tutu campaigned against white minority rule and worked hard to unite a deeply divided nation. The Arch, as he was known fondly, was also a family man.
My parents' relationship was strong and loving. They talked about loving each other. They talked about, oh, I think you're so handsome, or I think you're so beautiful, or you look so gorgeous today, or you smell delicious. No, he didn't say you smell delicious. He'd say, oh, you smell expensive.
The globally revered anti-apartheid icon's send-off will be held at the cathedral he called home for many years, to the sounds and hymns he chose ahead of his funeral. Nomsa Masego, BBC News, Cape Town.
Well, in just over 5 hours here in the UK, we'll be leaving 2021 behind and hoping for a rather better 2022 in so many ways. But the new year has already arrived on the other side of the globe. Australia, as usual, one of the first places to mark the new year with its traditional fireworks display in Sydney Harbour. But festivities around the world are said to be rather more muted in many places, with celebrations scaled back or cancelled in some countries. Right, there's more throughout the evening on the BBC News channel, but we'll be back with the late news at 10 here on BBC One, where it's time for the news where you are right now. Bye for now. Well, now here on BBC News Channel, we'll carry on with some of the day's other news.